Hello everyone, this is Dan. I wanted to do a video before the election, basically talking about a couple of different things, but the main focus I wanted to really discuss was some of what I've seen from a lot of people that are kind of in the dark about the political issues of today. They're kind of, and I'm not trying to sound like, I think I know everything. But, I'll say that to start off with. But people that kind of don't realize how much things have changed over the last few decades between the kind of political issues then, whether you're talking about the 50s, 60s, really through the 80s into the 90s, versus now. And it's one of the most frustrating things that I've seen as a consequence of this election and all of the stuff that goes along with this election, is you have a lot of people that don't realize how far things have shifted. And, I don't want to pick on older people. I don't want to pick on boomers too much, or, even people that are part of the silent generation, which was before the boomers, or just older people in general. I know millennials have a lot of problems. There are a lot of millennials that have no idea what's going on politically in this world too. But, it's just one of these things where things are so much different now in terms of what the parties represent. And it used to be, or maybe it used to be, that the Democratic Party represented working class Americans, that the Democratic Party represented, having a sort of balanced view about labor and business and a lot of other things, of course, that went into that. And you can argue, of course, whether the Democratic Party ever had a good platform or not. How much it's changed quite a bit. The focus has changed, but how much of it was just about winning elections and getting people to vote a certain way, which is just part of the political dynamic in general. My issue is a lot of people are not aware of what the Democratic Party has shifted into. They're not aware, and I look at some of my relatives, and like I say, especially some of the older relatives, they're not aware that it's no longer about whether you're working class or middle class versus the corporate class, or there is no such thing as a corporate class, but richer people that have a stake in business, or even small business owners who tend to be more Republicans and tend to vote for policies that the Democratic Party opposes. There are a lot of people that don't realize that that's no longer the paradigm. There's maybe a remnant of that left. You still have some corporations, of course, that support Republicans. You have people who vote Republican because they're interested in business matters. And you have people you have more organizations like the unions, public sector and private sector unions, that, the Democratic Party pretends to want to, kind of showcase, or that they pretend to care about. That's not what the Democratic Party represents anymore. The Democratic Party represents a divide and conquer sort of mentality. And it's based on attributes that you really have no control over. It's based on, are you a male or a female? Are you a man or a woman? What race do you belong to? What is your religion, or are you not religious? Are you pro LGBTQ or not? Do you not care about that, or even are you even against that? It is about which category you fall into. And again, the thing that kind of has made me, I don't want to say necessarily inspired, but sort of motivated to make this video, is older people in my family who I know the Democratic Party does not care about whatsoever, who are pretty conservative with how they live their lives. They work hard. They don't like to pay a lot in taxes, or they have worked hard in the past, for the people that are really older and retired now. Or they have a conservative, traditional conservative sort of religious bent, toward their thinking. That's sort of, in many of their cases, that's what really describes how they see the world. And I don't necessarily agree with all that. You could talk about the merits or the sort of faults in that type of thinking. But these are people who are conservative, white people who think that the Democratic Party has their interests in mind. And the reality is, guys, it's not about whether you work hard or whether you're part of the working class or the middle class anymore. It's not about the dichotomy between the Republicans and the Democrats as far as it exists today. Is not about that type of thing. It's about your race, your gender, where you stand on religion, where you stand on LGBTQ, and what kind of lifestyle you believe in, or that you live your own life as. And I'm hesitant to say this because this is not going to be something that is politically correct at all. It's going to be very controversial, but this is what it is. If you're white, male, Christian, conservative, or you don't care about LGBTQ, especially if you're a combination of many of those things in terms of how you live your life, do not vote for a Democratic Party candidate. And it's rare that, I give people, I try to basically tell people what to do, and that's not really what I'm about. That's not really what I'm trying to say, is that you have to do what I'm saying. But I advise people, if you fall into those categories, the Democratic Party hates you. They hate you. You are not representative. It doesn't matter whether you're working class or not anymore. It doesn't matter whether, you care about equality under the law. It's not about equality under the law. It's about whether you fit into one of the oppressor categories or multiple oppressor categories or not. That is the dichotomy that we have now. And somebody needs to say it. Somebody needs to point out to these voters that, they don't like Trump, and I can understand that. I'm not trying to debate about whether you should like Trump or want to vote for Trump or not. But ultimately, whether you like Republicans or not, or you have, an attitude of both Republicans and Democrats are bad, it doesn't really make much of a difference, guys. The Democratic Party hates you. If you are white and male, or if you are a conservative Christian woman, or if you are a black man that believes in conservative values. And what do I mean by conservative values here? I don't mean conservative in the sense that you have conservative politics necessarily. I mean you care about individual responsibility, you believe in the Constitution, you believe in free speech, due process. You apply these things not just to criminal law, but also in terms of how people are treated in society in general. You believe in individual accountability and freedom. You want lower taxes because you work hard for that. If that's what you're about, even if you're a black man, the Democratic Party has no use for you. And this fits all kinds of different groups of people, unless you fit into one of the so-called victim groups or multiple, especially if you're a woman that just wants free stuff from the government. I can understand that. If you're, and again, I'm not saying that's the right thing, but I can at least understand people's motivations in terms of, well, if you benefit from what the Democratic Party wants, it kind of makes sense for you to vote Democrat. That's, unfortunately, guys, that's how most people vote. That's just, I think, a realistic appraisal of it. Most people vote on what they think is in their interest. So I can understand people who are going to benefit, at least in the short run, from the Democratic Party being in power. Whether you're looking at it from the chief executive position, Biden in this election, and Kamala Harris and all them, or whether you're looking at it at the state level, it doesn't matter. I can understand people voting for Democrats who think that that's going to be beneficial to them. But if you are an oppressor, according to the Democratic Party platform today, which again is not, you're working class, or, you just want a fair deal. You just want, the economy to be good. You just want to be able to be successful and prosperous in life. That is not the dichotomy at place. That's not the political discussion anymore. It's, are you black or white? Are you a man or a woman? Are you pro-LGBTQ or not? Are you a Christian or not? And if you fit into one category, you're an oppressor. And if you fit into the other category, you're oppressed. That is the Democratic Party today, guys. And so again, it's sad for me. This is one of the most sort of frustrating and annoying things that I see when I see older white people who are conservative, especially the males, especially the men, who will say, well, I'm voting for Biden because Trump's bad, because they watch CNN all day or whatever the case may be. For whatever reason, they've been led to believe that that's the case. And they still think like the 1970s political atmosphere is still applicable today. That it's, oh, I vote Democrat because they're pro-union and they care about my interests. No, they don't. No, they don't. If you're a white male, you automatically are hated by everything the Democratic Party represents. You have people like Biden, candidates like Joe Biden, who, the Democrats will put out there and say that, he's going to be the leader, but he's not. He's just basically, he's going to be a figurehead if he gets elected. And I'm going to get into kind of a final overview and my take of the election as it's going to come up here too in a little bit. But, there are a lot of white males in the Democratic Party, but they are just basically there because they get the votes from people who fall into one of the groups of people that make up their constituency, that make up the sort of, you wouldn't call it an alliance, it's just the sort of scattered group of people that the Democratic Party says, hey, we'll give you free stuff if we get elected. And again, you can argue, well, Republicans are the same way. They just give corporations free stuff. They just give rich people free stuff. And you can think that. I'm not going to argue against that in this video. My take on it is not that really people that vote Republican and the conservative bloc is a lot different because there is no sameness. There is no homogeneous sort of quality to the people that vote Republican or conservative a lot of the time. It's more, you have a variety of different factions who vote conservative. You have your religious right. You have people who are not really religious but are traditional conservatives. They believe in the value of family and all that, but they may not be religious at all. You have people who just want small government, and they will support Republicans in the hope that, well, they're better than the Democrats, supposedly, when it comes to small government. Then you have your Republicans that, want America, your patriots that want America to be the strongest country in the world again. You have a variety of factions on the right or within the Republican Party. That's not what you have for the Democratic Party. That's not essentially what's going on. You have people that want to see themselves as victims and they want free stuff. So in my opinion, that's not comparable to what's going on with the Republicans. But again, I'm not trying to convince people in this video that you have to vote for Trump or that you have to have my point of view on everything that's going on in the political environment today. What I'm saying is pretty simple. If you're white and you're a male and you don't care about LGBTQ and you're not, fitting into any of the other victim groups, you're an oppressor. You are hated by the Democratic Party. And to vote for a party that hates you basically just makes you a useful idiot. And again, I don't like calling people names. It's really not my technique. That's not really what I would like to do with my content. But if you go decide that you're going to vote for Biden and you fit into these oppressor categories that the Democratic Party operates on, you are being a useful idiot as you do that. The Democratic Party does not care about you. You may not like Trump, but you are not part of what the Democratic Party is trying to build as its constituency. They don't care about you. And most Democrats hate you just for who you are. And you see this all the time. It doesn't matter really what you do. You see these white liberals constantly having to apologize just for who they are, basically. Just because, white people enslaved black people 150 years ago. Well, that's true. And I'm not saying we can't talk about that or that doesn't have consequences. But it makes no sense for people today to feel bad about that. Nobody who lived through that time period is even still alive today. You have the same thing with, feminism, where you have all these males in the Democratic Party, these men who are constantly saying, well, women are oppressed. We need to do more for women. That's the only way they can get by. And as soon as they say something or do something that doesn't go along doesn't go along with what the Democratic Party narrative, the leftist narrative is, you're going to be labeled a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, an Islamophobe, and so on and so forth. And honestly, guys, this is what you get. It's not going to matter who you are. It matters whether you fit into the overall sort of dynamic that the Democrats are trying to build as their party base. It's all about whether you're an oppressor or whether you're a victim. Monk Mode asked me if I voted for Joe or Trump. I haven't voted yet. I'm going to vote on Election Day, and I am going to vote for Trump. I'm not really the biggest fan of Trump, but my viewpoint on it is that he's the only one uniting people against what the left is trying to do today, and I can't support what the Democratic Party and what the left is trying to do today, so that's not going to happen as far as voting for Biden or anything like that. But, I'm frustrated about this, guys, because I see people who the Democratic Party does not have their interests in mind. And again, you can argue that the Republicans don't either, and that's a fair argument, or all right, I'm not arguing for or against that. But it is just so clear what the Democratic Party is about. It is about social justice. It is about whether you fall into the victim or oppressor category. It is about, giving free stuff to some groups of people and then telling other groups of people, well, you can't speak about this, or, you don't deserve due process. We're just going to accuse you of things. And if you're a man, people are just supposed to listen and believe. These are primarily leftists that want to go along with that. Monk Mode says, I prefer to be called a delusional idiot. I don't trust anyone in politics. Well, I don't either. And again, that's a legitimate discussion to be had about whether anybody's really going to reform the system. I think that Trump is at least an effort or an attempt to reform the system, whereas Biden and the Democrats, first of all, I don't think that the Democratic Party, things are heading in a direction where even if Trump gets reelected somehow, it just kind of staves off where things are going to move. It slows things down. I don't think we're going to be headed in the right direction anyway, to be honest. But at least with Trump in office, things are not going to go as rapidly downhill in some ways. But of course, the media turns it into a big circus, and it's really just a mess. But again, it's frustrating to see people who basically think that the Democratic Party still represents working Americans, or it still represents, the unions. And I have a lot of older relatives, and it's like they just don't see it. They don't realize that as conservative, mostly conservative, there's a variety of people, that have different political views in my family, but most of them are conservative in their lifestyles. They're conservative in the sense of, they're not trying to act like victims. They don't expect the government to help them. They basically just want to live their lives. A lot of them own homes. A lot of them have invested in society. They have conservative lifestyles. They believe in family. over, just give me free stuff because I have a kid. Most of them are decent people, but they believe that the Democratic Party and Biden better represents their interest than Trump. And again, you can love or hate Trump, but, to think that the Democratic Party is still working on that basis of, well, we're interested in just giving everyone a piece of the pie. We're just interested in equality under the law. That's not what it is anymore. And it's sad that people can't wake up and see that because, like I say, no matter what you do, if you fit into some of these categories, as soon as you don't toe the line, you're going to be labeled racist, sexist, homophobe. You see even among these leftists, as soon as a woman makes an accusation against one of the male members of the Democratic Party, it's like, oh, you're just, you're a monster now. You're just supposed to listen and believe now. The white men in the Democratic Party are just basically, like I say, they're useful idiots, or, they think it benefits them personally, but they may have that political power to some degree. They're basically puppets, but it's just that the average people that think that the Democratic Party cares about them, that's not what it is anymore. It's basically based on whether you fit into certain categories or not. It's based on social justice. It's not based on, okay, this person did this, and we're going to say he's racist now. Where is the evidence one way or the other whether the person's actually racist? No, we're just going to assume that that's the case because that's what goes along with the leftist narrative. That's what the Democratic Party is about. And I would imagine that in other Western countries, that's what your leftist parties are about. If you are Caucasian, male, Christian, or, any combination of those things, you are voting for your own demise by voting for the Democratic Party candidates. You really are. And again, if you have the view of, I just don't vote because I don't believe in the political system, that's fair enough. But for gosh sake, don't vote for the Democrats. It is just a mess. Alan Bizari, sorry, I'm too far away from the screen and I don't have my glasses on. BLM, Biden's laptop matters. Yeah, it's the media is really kind of trying to throw that under the rug and not focus on that. What can you do other than we kind of know what's going on with that in terms of who really has corruption issues tied to foreign countries and who doesn't. It's sad that there's been this effort at making this narrative that Trump rigged the last election somehow, but then we can't talk about the Biden laptop. Whatever. I would expect nothing better from the mainstream media outlets, honestly. So, the last kind of point that I want to make on this issue is if the Democrats would ever achieve a one-party state where basically the Republicans are just kind of like the main opposition party to the Democrats, and this is at many levels, especially at in the federal government, you're going to have regions of the country that remain Republican, that remain more conservative in terms of their political, or at least supposed political beliefs, or their sort of their lifestyle, or whatever you want to call it. But if the federal government gets to a point where we have a Democratic president, Congress is 60% Democrats in both houses. The Supreme Court, at least now, is shifted to the conservative side, so that's not going to happen for a while with them in terms of being a part of any sort of leftist alliance or any sort of leftist bloc. But if we get to a point where the indoctrination within our schools, within the media, and just basically pushing things further to the left as much as we can, if we get to the point where we have a one-party state, every issue that happens, every sort of policy question or decision that takes place, any sort of criticism about the government, it's just going to be, well, you're white or you're a male, you need to shut up. You don't support LGBTQ. You don't support all of these other made up genders that we're going to, insist are legitimate genders. And if you don't go along with that, then we're going to say that you're bad. That's what you're going to get when it comes to every policy decision you have. If the Democratic Party becomes absolutely dominant, if they have basically a one-party state or system. And so, it's just not a good state of affairs when you have people that think that they're doing the right thing for themselves or even for their country by voting for Biden. Again, I can understand most people vote for their own interests, especially their short-term interests. And I can understand people saying, well, I'm a single mom, so I'm going to vote for the Democratic candidates. All right, I don't think that's the right choice, but I can at least understand it. It at least makes sense. It's not good for the country, but again, most people don't care about what's good for the country, unfortunately. They, on both sides, they just vote for whatever they think is in their interest. But that's the sad thing about it, is the Democratic Party candidates and the whole platform is hostile to certain groups of people. And if you're a white, male, conservative, Christian, you don't care about LGBTQ, if you're any of the, especially if you're a combination of two or more of those things, you are not going to be respected in a society run by Democrats. You are going to be the scapegoat for everything. You will be public enemy number one. And it's sad that a lot of people that are basically conservative, they don't agree with, BLM, they don't agree with feminism, they don't agree or they don't care at the very least about LGBTQ rights. It's like you can already get married, you can already do everything anyway. For the people that see it that way and fit into those categories, they're voting for a Democratic candidate. I think this is almost universal. You might be able to find an exception in an extremely conservative area where the Democratic candidate is just kind of a moderate, but even then, the whole platform, everything the Democratic Party believes in, is against your interests. And if you fit into the so-called, bad people categories, you will be labeled. You can see this with the 2016 election. Hillary Clinton saying, "Oh, look at all these deplorables." It was really telling when she said that, because that's why she said that. That's what that really means, is you are not only a Trump supporter, but you fit into these categories that we label as the bad guys. And, like I say, it's just sad that people can't get that it wasn't just Hillary Clinton that thinks that. It's the whole Democratic Party that thinks that you're deplorable based on your race, your gender, your religion, your stance on LGBTQ, and your general lifestyle and ideology. Like if you fit into certain descriptions, you are considered bad regardless of what you do, unless you constantly just, simp out for the Democratic Party platform, for whatever the narrative is. You're constantly apologizing for being these things. And even then, the moment that you digress from that, the moment that you disagree with that, you're going to be labeled every bad thing in the book by the leftist, people, by the Democratic Party and the leftist agenda in general. And so, please, the main point with all this is, don't be a useful idiot. Please don't be a useful idiot and vote for Democrats. And like I say, this isn't just Biden. This is basically the entire Democratic apparatus, the whole, pretty much at every level. If you vote for a Democrat, you are voting for a platform or a representative of a platform that hates you, that will never give you a fair shake and will always basically say you're an oppressor or you're privileged because of your race, your gender, etc. Don't be a useful idiot. Don't vote Democratic. And I have a feeling that, most people, a lot of people will, because they've been really brainwashed by the media and the flow of information around them to think that, it's just about equality. BLM doesn't have anything to do with the Democrats, Feminism's just about equality. All this stuff that, is really not true. But that's been what the flow of information has told them. So it's just one of these deals where I hope enough people wake up to this. Like I say, you don't have to like Trump necessarily. You don't have to like the Republican Party. You can be a leftist, as far as I'm concerned, who doesn't go along, with everything that the Democratic Party is doing. You're more of a classical liberal, or you're left of center. You're probably not going to be too far to the left, but you're center left. If you can see what's going on, please don't vote for a Democrat. Unless, again, you don't fall into those categories and you think it can benefit you because you're not conservative, you're an ethnic minority, you're a woman, or any of those things. Like, I at least understand that you have short-term interest there, that the Democratic Party is going to represent better. But if you're one of the so-called oppressor people, please do not vote for a Democrat. Again, please don't be a useful idiot. I hate saying that because I don't really like to call people names, but if you fit into those descriptions and you vote for a Democrat, you're being a useful idiot while you do that. Not saying you have to vote for Trump or Republicans either. Do your thing. But realize that the Democratic Party platform is hostile to who you are, to your very being. You will never be accepted among that party in any sort of real sense. You will always be considered privileged somehow, just based on those things. G-Man says, Happy Halloween. And a jack-o'-lantern and is that a devil? Yeah, Happy Halloween, I guess. I don't care about Halloween very much, to be honest. It's kind of fun to an extent, but not something I pay much attention to. John Murphy says, Hello, Ohio Dan. Been enjoying your take on politics. Yeah, I appreciate that. I feel like I'm doing too many political videos lately compared to some of my sort of manosphere content. But at the same time, this is the time for it. Like, this is a big election in terms of where the country's going to go. Yes, to an extent, it's going to go in the wrong direction probably anyway, but more so if Biden wins, I think, than if Trump wins. And, this is going to be my last video until after the election, I'm sure. And if I turn out to be wrong, and I also wanted to get into some of the polls that I've seen within the last few days on the presidential race and so on. It does look to me like there have been a few polls that have shown, or there have been a few polls that have shown Trump to be closer, within at least 5 points of Biden. The Rasmussen polls have shown Trump to be about 3 to 5 points behind, rather than 7 or 8 points behind. And there have been a few others like Emerson, and I think there's a poll called The Hill, where it's 4 or 5 points as well. So does Trump still have a chance to win this election? Yeah, there's still a chance. I'm looking at it and it's like, if those polls turn out to be correct, even though they're in the minority, then Trump may still have a chance to win, at the Electoral College level, depending on what goes on in each state, of course, which is what really matters. But a lot of the polls, the average is still 7 or 8 points. Even Fox News, their polls are like 8 to 10 points. It shows Trump way behind. If that turns out to be correct, if the majority of the polls are at least close to being accurate, Trump's not going to win. And, it becomes a question of, is this going to be like the 2016 election? And are there more similarities between 2020 and 2016, or are there more differences? And I think that with Biden, as Reverend 20 Piece has said, and some others as well, people don't hate Hillary. Or I'm sorry, they don't hate Biden like they did hate Hillary. And it's just not quite the same. People are sick of the media nonsense. They're sick of everything that's gone on over the last 4 years with everything that some people have become basically indoctrinated, while other people I think are just sick of the whole thing. And they think if they get Trump out of there, then they won't have to watch it anymore, which is a poor reason to vote. But I think that's part of what's going on as well. But like I say, I know a lot of older people in my family and whatnot, and I don't like to make this a generational thing because there's a lot of dumb millennials as well. But some of these older people think we're still in the 70s or the 80s or even, the 50s and 60s in terms of the political dynamic. They think that they support the Democratic Party is going to support the working man, or they think that, Trump is just a corporate crony and the Democratic Party, they're not that way. They still have this old, outdated view of the contrast between the two parties, between the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party. And no, that's not what it is anymore. It's about, do we stick with Western values or do we have this oppressor narrative? That's really what more than anything, the differences between the two parties it revolves around. Like I say, even if there are people watching this that agree with the Democratic sort of planks or issues that they have, the sort of things that they're trying to do, even if you agree with some of what they're trying to institute, honestly, guys, they still hate you. If you're a white, generally conservative person, especially if you're male, especially if you're religious, in the sense of Christians or, Christianity, or probably anything that's along those lines that causes you to be more conservative and not just want the state to step in and take over everything, the Democratic Party hates you. If you fall into any of those oppressor categories, if you're someone that's likely to defend the Constitution, the basic elements of the Constitution, if you're someone who doesn't support, I'm a victim, so the government needs to tax everybody so that I can get stuff for free. The Democratic Party, especially, like I say, if you're white and if you're a male, the Democratic Party has very little use for you, other than, of course, they'll accept your votes. But once they get in office, they're hostile toward you. Their entire platform has become hostile toward people that don't fit into those certain categories or do fit into the oppressor categories. And I wish that older people got this. I wish that they could understand this. And a lot of them do, don't get me wrong. And there are young people that want socialism, that, want everything they've been indoctrinated to support in terms of what the left is trying to accomplish. But you especially have, when it comes to this issue, older people that think, the Democratic Party will protect my Social Security, which, again, maybe you can make a case for that, but is it going to be worth having people in office that are hostile against everything that you are and everything that you live around, everything that you've built your life on? They do not represent the workers or middle class people anymore, the Democratic Party. They don't, if they ever did. You could argue whether they ever did in the past or not, but they certainly don't now. They represent this sort of attempt to transition from having a society based on Western values to having a society that's based on social justice and which group you fit into, and basically the state. They want to replace Western values and ideas with the state just doing what it wants. And again, you can think the Republicans are just as bad if you want to. I'm not going to argue against that here. I don't think that's true in every case. But that's not the point. The point is, please don't vote for Democrats if if this is who you are, if this is the category or the sort of attributes that you have, don't vote for a Democratic candidate because they hate you. They hate you if you fall into one of those descriptions, and as soon as they're done with you, they will toss you aside. As soon as they think, well, you're not going to go along with what we want, they're going to Me Too you, they're going to call you a racist, they're going to say you're a homophobe, they're going to say everything they can. Because they don't like you to begin with. They're just taking advantage of you not really understanding what's going on, not understanding the political dynamic that's at play today. So that's just what I wanted to say. I don't know that very many people will watch this. And, it's just, I'm going to vote for Trump. I would recommend people do that in this election. But even if you hate Trump, all right, fair enough. Don't vote for Biden. Don't vote for these Democrats. The Democratic Party has become beyond any sort of redemption in terms of how corrupt it is. It's just beyond any sort of fixing. It is just all about taking power, growing the size of the state, and labeling people as oppressors or oppressed based on what category they fall into. And if you don't support that, please don't vote Democratic. John Murphy says, the Trumpsters sure are confident in a Trump wave. I don't know what to think. My family, who consider themselves moderate, are voting Biden. Hard not to lose some respect for them. They think I'm brainwashed. Yeah, you know what? I've had the same experience. As soon as you start to say, well, the media has really been extremely biased against Trump since even before he became president, but definitely since he's been in office, they'll say, well, you just believe whatever Trump says. They create this straw man argument. That's been my experience, at least, of, well, you must believe everything Trump says. It's like, no. Even if you have a balanced point of view, you're going to be labeled that. And I do. In this case, I definitely have more of a balanced point of view because I don't like Trump's egoism. I recognize that Trump just says whatever he feels like saying a lot of the time, and that's not necessarily a good thing because a lot of the time he says things that aren't really true. I recognize that those aren't good qualities, but I also recognize everything the media has been trying to do, and I recognize, like I've said in this video, what the Democratic Party is trying to do. And so, a balanced point of view that doesn't go along with the leftist narrative is going to lead to you being labeled as a Trump supporter. And that's my experience on it, and it's sad. But that's just sort of how it ends up, I guess, when enough people get brainwashed and the flow of information is controlled so much by one side over the other. It's just... yeah, it's sad. Because like I say, a lot of my family members they are traditional conservatives. And they should be voting Republican if they were really informed and they were political, if they cared. They should probably be voting for a Republican candidate. Now, for myself, I don't really fit into that. I'm more of a libertarian-leaning, center-right something. I basically consider myself a type of libertarian, so I'm not really a traditional conservative to begin with, but a lot of them are, and it makes no sense for them to be voting for Biden, especially given, again, they're the oppressor class, according to the Democratic Party elites, so it's not good, and like you say, a lot of people think that Trump is going to win. It's just going to be like 2016. Does not appear that way. It could still happen if the polls are wrong, other than the few that I mentioned here, the Rasmussen polls, the Hill, and Emerson, I think are the three that I saw that have it somewhere between 3 to 5 points for Biden's lead. But the overall polls in general have it 7, 8, 9, 10 points. You're not going to overcome that. It doesn't matter which states vote what, really. Once you get to such an extreme point, I don't think that you can overcome that in the Electoral College because a lot of the states are just going to go blue if there's that much support for Biden. And it just doesn't look good to me, Heartburn, I think, if anybody's watched his channel, I think he's going to have another election showing like he did in 2016. I'm kind of interested in what he has to say. I kind of already have an idea that he thinks Trump is going to win for sure, but I don't know, man. I don't know that we'll have the results by the end of Tuesday night, but I think that it's not going to go for Trump. And like I've said in other videos, we all need to be prepared as much as we can be for what's going to happen within the next few days and weeks and months and so on after this election. Because either way, there's going to be a lot of angry people, more so than normal, after a presidential election. This is such a contentious election. Trump has been campaigning basically since he's been in office against the media. The media has been campaigning against Trump. So it's just been such a heightened, everything's been put on such a heightened state, such a heightened level that, you know, people are really just very angry, and I can understand why on both sides. It's just a very divisive election. And yeah, you know, either way, when it's all done, people are going to be mad. So hopefully they don't go mad and do a whole bunch of crazy stuff, but I think we are going to see some people do that. So, but like I say, guys, I hope that I'm wrong on my prediction for the election, and if I am, I am. You know, I'll probably make a video about, okay, here's why I was wrong, and, you know, here's how I'm going to see things going forward, because I need to make a correction if my view's not correct on you know, trying to predict this or trying to kind of assess what's going on. But I'm pretty sure that Biden's going to win, unfortunately. I just don't see it being the same as 2016. That's what a lot of it comes down to is, will this go the same way that 2016 did? It could, but I really don't see that happening. So, you know, like I say, it's frustrating to me to see people who, I know that everything that they stand for, everything they believe, goes against what the Democratic Party is. But they're stuck in the 70s. They're stuck in the 50s. Or at least, you know, the 80s. Like, which decade they're stuck in, I guess, is up to debate. But in any case, it's not healthy. And they just don't get it. They don't realize that the Democratic Party hates them. If you're not a feminist, you're not someone that supports BLM, you're not someone that wants, you know, socialized health care for everybody, if you're not someone that wants to, you know, embrace LGBTQ goals, even if you're just indifferent to that, which most people are, I think. You know, if you're not somebody that supports those things, you're bad. You're the devil, according to the Democratic Party, according to their platform. You know, one other thing that I didn't plan to include with this video that I've been thinking about is, what do you think the chances are, the odds of Biden living through his term? You know, it's been a long time, and I don't mean anything in a threatening sense. It's just a matter of health and age and stuff like that. It's been a long time since we've had a president not live through their term. The last one was Kennedy, I think, who, you know, he had some help. He had some help from people that decided that they didn't want him to live anymore, of course. And there's a big sort of theory about that kind of stuff, but he's the last one that, well, I guess Nixon didn't finish his term because he resigned. So technically it would be Nixon that is the last one that didn't finish his term. But it's been a long time. You know, it's been since the 60s and 70s, respectively, since that's happened. So it's been over 40 years, close to 50, since a president didn't finish their term. Do you think Biden's going to make it for 4 years? You know, he's already saying things like, you know, I'm running for Senate and I'm running against George Trump. He didn't, you know, he couldn't remember whether he's running against Bush or Trump. I understand people making flubs, and Biden has always made flubs, but it's just like, I'm not always that eloquent, and I say things and get words confused and stuff like that too. But, Biden just looks and sounds like he just does not really know what's going on completely. 4 more years, what do you think the chances are of Kamala Harris becoming president within that time, within that frame of time between now and the end of that term? I think that Biden, I wouldn't bet on him to make it, let's say that. And again, I don't mean that in a threatening sense. I mean that in terms of his health and his age. And also the Democratic Party motivations. Like I've said in this whole video, they don't really have any respect for, or they don't like white men. So they're going to try to get Biden out of there if they can. And it probably wouldn't be too difficult. You could look back at some of the, sort of overly friendly behaviors that he has, and they could easily Me Too him, I think, and demand that he resign for the good of the country and put Kamala Harris in there. I think that could happen. But it's more likely, again, that I don't know whether he's going to be up for the job, for being president for 4 years. It depends also probably on whether he's just totally a figurehead or whether they actually expect him to do more. Like, I doubt if they do. If he doesn't have to do a lot of the work, and the work is just done by the cabinet that he establishes and Kamala Harris and the DNC probably, if the Democratic Party itself basically is the president or represents the presidency more than Biden, then maybe he'll make it. He won't have that burden. But if he actually ages the way that some presidents have within 4 years, especially since it looks like his mind is not 100%, even compared to what it was several years ago, I don't know whether he'll make it or not. So John Murphy says, excellent, speaking facts. Yeah, I try to be objective. I'm sure that in some ways I'm probably not, but all I can do is talk about my thoughts and experiences with this and what I see going on, and that's what I try to do on my channel, regardless of the topic. So, like I say, there may be some people that don't like this, especially people that operate on that old paradigm of, well, the Democratic Party just wants equality for the working people. No, they don't. They want to separate people out. They want to grow the size of the state, and they want to upend Western values. They want to upend the things that our society and our civilization is built on. They want to get rid of that and replace it with basically the state. And they don't want people to have rights anymore. And this whole idea of dividing people up and then conquering them, basically, is their strategy. And if you're not part of the group of people that they can use, they're probably going to get rid of you, or they hate you in the first place. They're not interested in helping working people. They're not interested in they're not interested in any of the things that they supposedly stood for 30, 40, 50 years ago. It is all about, what is your race, what is your gender, what is your sexual orientation, what is your religion, what is your ideology, what is your lifestyle. And if you fall into the wrong categories, you're bad. You're racist, you're homophobic, you're sexist, and so forth if you don't say and do what we want. That's what the Democratic Party has become. And if people vote for that, knowing that they fall into, especially if you fall into 2 or more of those categories, that's foolish. You're being a useful idiot. Don't do that. Don't vote for Democratic candidates if if those are the categories you fit into. John Murphy says, they call Trump an authoritarian manually. Meanwhile, Biden is ready to have a federal mask mandate. Yeah, it's just, of course, it's agenda driven. It's not based on, well, we assess what Trump is doing and he's an authoritarian. The thing is, there's a lot of stuff that I've said already about the mask mandate. What do you expect the president to do? Most of this is done at the state level. The federal government should have no authority whatsoever to, enforce a mask mandate. The state level government really shouldn't have the authority to do that. But you're basically saying, well, these governors of these different states have no power. We're just going to order them to do what we want. I don't see the basis for that. I think it would be unconstitutional, especially since the Supreme Court, hopefully, at least theoretically, is more conservative. I think they'd say, if there's a federal mask mandate, I think they'd rule that unconstitutional. But it might take years for the case to get there. But yeah, it could just be one of those deals like they do with the drinking age, where if a state doesn't have a drinking age of 21, if you try to make your drinking age lower than that, we won't give you funds to repair your roads. That's why every state has that law, basically, is you have to be 21 in the United States to drink in every state, because the federal government will take your funds away. That might be more likely. The federal government would say, oh, we're not going to give you, any sort of funding for Medicare, or not Medicare, but probably your Medicaid programs. We're not going to help you with that. We're not going to help you cope with the virus or anything like that unless you have a mask mandate. That could be definitely something that's in the cards if Biden wins. From the Democratic administration, I could definitely see that, of a case where you either have a mask mandate for your state, or we don't give you health care funding in different ways. And so every state, of course, ends up doing it. And for how long? Forever, basically, until there's a cure. It's stupid. The virus is still going to spread. I don't know if anybody... I've gone on and on and on about the virus, and I don't really need to speak about that more, I think. But what's the point? What's the end game of these masks and telling people to stay at home? Like, if we don't have a cure in 3 years, let's say, 3 years from now, it turns out we don't have a cure. And maybe we will by then. I don't know. There's a chance we will. Probably a decent chance we will. But let's just say within 3 years, we still don't have a cure. Well, what are we going to do? Just keep wearing the mask for year after year every time we go out in public? People aren't going to do that. That's dumb to think that people are going to do that. And why should they? It doesn't resolve the problem. It doesn't stop the virus. It just slows it down. So, I think the whole thing is foolishness. I think the whole thing is just the government doesn't know what to do about this virus. And so there's no solution. What does the government do best? It takes people's rights away and then pretends like it's doing something. And that's what this is. It's just, well, people want us to do something and take action. We don't have a solution to this. There's no cure. Let's just tell them to stay at home and make them wear masks. That's honestly how I see this. And like I say, I don't want to get too much into that because I've blathered on and on and on about that. But, yeah, it is what it is. All we can do is try to do our own assessments and do what's best for us given the craziness. Heart Donor says, so they're going to cheat. Heart Donor, who's going to cheat? I'm not sure what that was in reference to. I know my stream, it looks like it's way behind the comments. Or really, actually, it's not uploading to YouTube quickly enough. So that's something I need to work on, because it kind of lowers the value of these comments. But, there could be a variety of things that could happen in terms of cheating in this election. Like I say, it's just the whole election process is really kind of convoluted now. A lot of people are mailing in ballots. Will we even know who wins by the end of election night? Will the media try to say, Biden won? Biden won. And then Trump has to kind of work against the narrative once again with all these people that are just brainwashed and will just believe what the media says. Well, they said Biden won, so he must have. And then, they won't do a recount or something. Could something like that go on? Yeah, it's possible. I just think that the powers that be will ensure that Trump doesn't get reelected somehow. And I think that the most likely case is that he just won't win, to be honest. people may not like me saying that, but that's the trend that I see. You know, people may not agree with me, in other words, but that's the trend that I see with this. And so we'll find out. I hope I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, you can laugh at me, and I'll make a video and say, hey, I was wrong, and this is what we can take out of the election. It's a very sort of unsettling event. You know, it's going to be something that we don't know what's going to happen. Most of us, either way, no matter what the outcome is, stuff could go down that's really negative, that's really impactful in a negative way. And I hope people are just kind of prepared. I at the very least, you know, and I'm not prepared as much as I'd like to be, but at the very least, I hope people don't think that Trump is just going to walk away easily, just going to trounce Biden on election day. There seem to be a lot of Trump supporters that think that, and it's just like, I just hope they don't freak out, or not freak out in the sense of doing something bad, but I hope that, you know, they're still prepared for the contingency where that doesn't happen. Because I think it's very unlikely that that's how things are going to play out. But again, we'll see. Maybe Trump pulls it out somehow. You know, maybe he loses in the popular vote by 3 to 5 points, but he actually wins Pennsylvania, and he wins Florida, and he wins, you know, Michigan or something of that nature, and they hold all the other red states except maybe Wisconsin. If that could happen, then Trump could win, of course, but I doubt if it's going to play out that way, to be honest. Well, I've been blathering on for over an hour now, so, you know, I probably should have made this video earlier in the night, but I waited until now. So, probably won't have too many views on this, but like I say, guys, the main point of this video is, if you fall into the so-called oppressor class, if you are someone that is, you know, a combination of things, like if you're a man and you have a conservative lifestyle, or if you are a white woman that cares about, you know, family values or whatever, if you are a black man that is the same, you know, and you work hard and you don't want high taxes and you don't play the victim card, you know, if you're an LGBTQ person who doesn't believe that other people or society in general should be forced to endorse anything that you do, and especially, again, the two biggest things are, if you're a white male, you are not really welcome in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is not interested in what's good for you. They will use you. They don't care about you because they want support from other groups of people. They want support from the people that basically will say, you're an oppressor, and therefore we're going to vote for the Democratic Party. And it doesn't matter, again, how much you think you fit in. If you say or do something that doesn't toe the line, you will be labeled a misogynist, you'll be labeled racist, you'll be labeled all these things. Do not vote for Democratic candidates. Don't vote for Biden. Not saying you have to like Republicans or you have to vote for Trump. But the Democratic Party hates you if you fall into these categories. And it's sad to see people that I know fall into those descriptions. They're conservative, they're white, you know, of course you have men and women in terms of in my family and stuff like that. But still, even if you're a conservative woman who values family and stuff like that, doesn't want to be dependent on the government for anything, don't vote for Biden. Don't vote for Democrats, because you are not part of their collective. You are one of the deplorables, according to the Democratic Party platform and according to everything that they believe. And if you vote for Democratic candidates, that's what you're going to get. You know, if they ever gain so much power that we have basically a one-party state, you're going to find out that they don't respect your rights. You're going to find out that they want equality, but equality at your expense, meaning equality from the standpoint that you're an oppressor, so you need to give more, and so we're going to raise your taxes. We're going to make sure that the family is dependent on the state rather than you as the man being anything near the head of the household. And that's a separate discussion. Men are not the head of the household anymore when there's a woman involved. Women are basically the head of the household because that's already been settled through feminism, unfortunately. That's my take on it, at least. But that's a different topic. But, if you're someone who, like I say, you fall into the oppressor categories, doesn't matter what you say or what you do or how nice you are about it, as soon as the party decides that your time is up, your time's going to be up. And I don't mean that in the sense of dying or something of that consequence, but I mean you're not going to be welcome anymore because they're just using you to begin with. They're going to Me Too you. They're going to label you as a racist. They're going to, say that, oh, you hate LGBTQ because you won't recognize these random genders that don't exist. These genders that have no basis in reality, based on anything genetic or anything biological. You'll be labeled as an oppressor if you come out against that kind of stuff. We're headed toward that. In some countries like Canada, that's already the case. But in the United States, we're not quite there yet with the whole trans thing, but we're headed toward that most likely if the Democrats continue to win. If they're the ones that gain more power, that come to hold the federal level offices, especially in Congress, in the presidency, and all that, this is what you're going to get. So if you don't support those kinds of things, I don't care, you may not like Trump. Please don't vote for Biden. Don't vote for these Democrats. That's my take on it. If you disagree or if you agree, you can leave a comment after this video gets done. And like I say, thanks for watching. I appreciate the comments. I probably need to do something to improve my connection so that it uploads faster. But I'm new to this, so we'll figure it out as I go along, or I will.